class listeners, to another episode with me, Mackenzie Tiggs. I just want to give a huge shout out to Zero Dark 30 today for being one of our sponsors. You guys can actually go to the link in the description, put in RAW for a discount code, and be able to get coffee from a first responder and veteran owned company. So please reach out to them. He is my number one podcast so far on YouTube and listen. So please go take a listen to his story, what his drive is, and where he's going. Today, I am super privileged to have Derek with us from Focal Point Productions. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So a little bit about his background, listeners, is being a first responder, coming into this entrepreneurship. A lot of my listeners and a lot of my guests have as well. So I want you to deep dive into what it was like getting into the career of being a first responder.
Okay, yeah. So I knew I wanted to be a first responder, a cop, really, when I was young. My dad was a cop. He did, I think, in total about 31 years. He was at Huntington Park, which is down in Southern California. That's where I grew up. And so I knew that's what I wanted to do going into high school. I remember having a conversation like it was yesterday with him. And once I told him, hey, I want to be a cop. And he said, no, I should do firefighter, like be a firefighter. Took me on ride-alongs, and then we'd go check out the fire station. So I was like, cool, like I'll listen to your what you say, and started doing that route, started taking the classes in high school. And that was my goal. I was like dead set on going to be a firefighter. So then it was, get my EMT, went and did that. Started volunteering down in San Diego. Did that for, I think, about 2.5, 3 years. Went to, three different fire academies. Still wasn't getting hired, putting in applications from all the way up to Lodi, California, which is like Central California, to inland and down towards like the border of California. And just nothing was happening. So what was the next thing I had to do? I was like, hey, everybody's got to get your paramedic. So went to paramedic school, started working as a paramedic over in Hemet, and did that for another about 3 years. And so in total, I think it was like 31 applications to fire departments just throughout the state. Got close a couple times, and then budget cuts or something else always happened or came up, and so it just wasn't working out. So eventually I got to the point where I was like, okay, I've got to just sort of pivot. Like, I know this is still something that I want to do. I want to be a first responder. I want to, serve a community in this way. So then the neighboring department to my dad's department where he was working, they were hiring. So I went and put in my application. It was the first police department I put my application in for, and got hired. And it was just crazy, like, to think about like all the times I put in for this fire department. I was expecting kind of the same, pushback or struggle with police department. It was the first one that got picked up, and I loved it. I got hired in 2012, and kind of went through all the different things that I really wanted to do, as far as working patrol, worked gangs, part of the SWAT team, part of the community relations team. Ended up finishing up I did 10 years, and I left as a detective. So I kind of did like all the things that I wanted to do, and that was pretty much my journey to that.
Yeah. How was it having this knowledge of being a paramedic and then now you're a police officer in SWAT? Like, did that help you with being a police officer, or how did that kind of in your brain?
Yeah, it definitely helped me. Especially with that stress of like going on calls and being sort of the one to dictate what's going on because I was out in Hemet. Like Hemet Fire at the time was all BLS. And I was like a solo medic. My partner was usually an EMT. Occasionally we'd roll like dual medics. And I remember like I was young at the time, thinking back like 22, 23, and like telling these like tenured firefighters like what to do. And so that aspect of it like really helped transition into law enforcement, because it was, you arrive on scene, You take charge, you're in control, you're calm, cool, and collected, and you just kind of handle what you need to handle. And then I was also a part of the SWAT team as the SWAT medic. So I was helping, doing classes for our guys. I got sent to like some really cool training where they incorporated like SWAT medic stuff, like shooting and running calls and doing, the medical aid and all that stuff. So that was a blast. I had fun doing that. I did that for I think 6 or 7 years. I was on the SWAT team.
Wow.
Yeah.
How was it? Your professional career sounds like it, like, really accelerated fast, like 10 years looking at that and being able to cover all of those different categories within law enforcement. Did they really teach you within your department the personal development as well? Or where was that kind of coming in? Like your career's doing really well, but what was life with your career?
I mean, they started trying to do some of this personal development, but they really didn't get into a whole lot of it. And my life was not really balanced. I neglected a lot of things at home. I mean, I ended up going through divorce. I had 2 kids with that marriage. Um, so things were definitely out of balance. And like looking back into it, I know I was in like really dark places at certain times. Um, a lot of things that were really hard for me to like open up about, and probably things that I still haven't even really opened up about. Um, and like looking back at just that time sort of missed with my younger ones, because now I'm remarried and we have 2 kids. I got a 2-year old and a 5.5 month old, and like realizing now with my career where I'm at and being able to spend time with them and see like all the things, it makes me appreciate it, but also realize sort of what I had missed out on maybe with my older two, um, and realizing just how much time I put into, you know, being a cop, doing all the cool jobs, but neglecting my family at the same time.
Yeah. And I think that's a very common thing, with a lot of different careers for sure, but where you are chasing your development and always, going for the next rank or going for the next promotion in your career, but then your family life really falls to the side. What would be a tip for people like the younger version of you in those situations before you got the divorce? Like what could you tell them where you're like, don't do what I did, right? Like what would open them up, do you think, from a male and being in that situation?
My biggest thing that I've kind of realized now, because tend to study like stoicism and sort of that philosophy. So my biggest thing I think that's helped me is just being present, just telling myself to be wherever I'm at, and like fully involved in that situation, like this right now, like not worrying about what's going on outside, like just being like in this conversation. I mean, that's one of the things I guess mantras in a way I tell myself is, just to be present. Um, that's sort of my biggest thing, my biggest tip. Because I know when you live in the past, and if I dwell on like the negativity that I've had and dealt with, end up getting depressed, and getting kind of stuck in that. If you're worrying about what's in the future, like I'm trying to like accomplish all these goals, and I want to be sergeant, I want to do this, I want to do that. Um, Things get neglected and overlooked, and then you end up having the anxiety and the stress coming along with that. So yeah, I would have told myself to just enjoy the moment, enjoy what you have, um, and just be present, be grateful. That's one of like my words that kind of pop up all the time is just gratitude. And I just try and it's work to try and just remember to do that, because it's so easily with social media and everything that we got going on to forget about that, but to be able to take that time and just kind of stay grounded and just be present in whatever it is that you're doing right now.
Yeah. What has something been that has been outside of the career? I already know the answer, but outside of the career, but being able to help your career and your own personal kind of mental health.
Being outside it. So say that one more time.
I already know what the answer is. I mean, jujitsu, right?
Oh,
Like,
okay.
how has that been able to um, help your police work, your family life, and your own life personally?
Yeah. So I started training, I think, right around the time became a cop. And jujitsu was one of those things I'd kind of been off and on for a while. Um, but then I really got into it probably like 2015, and I saw like the benefits. Just, I mean, from a law enforcement perspective, um, I really think that most, if not all, cops should train at least some form of jujitsu. Um, I mean, just understanding how your body moves in relation to somebody else's. Even, I mean, I used it pretty much every day I was on patrol in some form of just a basic control hold. And then just the confidence that comes with realizing what you can do and what you maybe can't do, or and you think that you can. Um, I mean, and it's one of the most like humbling things. I know a lot of, I think, police officers specifically have maybe struggle with doing jujitsu is when they get into it and then they have to get their ego checked and they get humbled. Because I mean, just this morning, I went to the gym and we have a newer girl that's been training there. I mean, she's probably 120, 130 pounds, and she choked me out.
Wow.
And I'm a purple belt right now, and she was a blue belt, and I got caught, and it's like it's very humbling, and that's just one of those things, those aspects of jiu-jitsu that I enjoy is sort of that just ego check to kind of put me in my place. Um, and then also kind of going back to what I was saying earlier about just being present. It's like if you're getting choked out, you're not thinking about what's going on outside. It's
Right.
like you're worried about what's happening right now. So I mean that kind of helped just reinforce that. Um, and so even now, outside of law enforcement, it's still great for me to just be a part of that community, and everybody's sort of like-minded in the sense of what jujitsu brings to them. I mean, you have people that are, like I think when I was training, you have people that maybe you've arrested or chased after or whatever, and it's like you have the cops, you have like the good and the bad, but all these people come together and on the mats and just learn from each other.
Yeah, that's awesome. We're going to take a quick break for our sponsors, giving them a shout out. But after we come back from that, I really want to ask you like how jiu-jitsu can help our police force. That's the first time this has ever happened. All right. Roberto, you ready for the question? Okay. So I'm curious to know how jiu-jitsu could be incorporated with, the police force to be able to help them with their mental capacity, but also their physical capacity in going to these calls, having to handle these situations. How could that be incorporated within the departments?
So I think there's definitely a lot of benefits with jujitsu. Right before I left, I was really trying to get something incorporated, some sort of program, trying to do some sort of collaborations with there was a newer jiu-jitsu studio that had opened up in Southgate, and we were working on trying to do something along those lines. I know some of the pushback that I had personally, and then also have just kind of seen throughout other departments, is the administration worrying about injuries. Um, and there's not really a whole lot of studies. There's one study that I had kind of cited and tried bringing up to them. It was Marietta PD. I think they're back east somewhere, where they actually implemented and made it mandatory for their recruits, and then opened it up to their seasoned officers to do jujitsu. And I don't remember the exact study how they did it, but it was you had to train at least I think once or twice a week. Um, and so they took basically the uses of forces that happened prior to this implementation of jiu-jitsu, um, and took all the statistics and then used it, I think, and retested or restudied it a year after. um, I think there was something close to like 60%, maybe 59% of uses of forces went down, or the injuries. I mean, the injuries to officers was reduced. The injuries to suspects were reduced. Um, the injuries that they were talking about, that they were worried about in training, they didn't want their officers injured. I think out of the, I don't know, whatever it was, 1,000 training hours, there was only one officer that was injured, and I think it was like maybe a busted nose.
Wow.
So pretty minor in the scheme of things. And then the workers' comps claims went down something like $40,000. So they're actually like saving money by investing into jiu-jitsu. Um, and then I was looking at a study recently, um, just talking about like the mental resiliency and sort of dealing with just the mental health that jiu-jitsu could potentially bring. There's not a whole lot of studies on it, um, but I could speak from my own experiences. I know sort of my resilience and mental fortitude is kind of built up with that, where it's, yeah, I'm training and I'm understanding how to manipulate my body in relation to somebody else's. I'm getting comfortable in very stressful situations, um, and understanding, like, hey, if I have to use force on this guy right now, well, I've done this 1,000 times, so I know sort of how to react to this, and I can kind of think through that process. Like the more training you have in jiu-jitsu, like one of the biggest things that I had when training was my breathing. One of my old instructors from my old gym, he would tell me that was like one of the first things when I was a white belt was, hey, really focus on your breathing, control your breathing. He's like, don't worry about the position, don't worry about trying to submit it or do anything like that. Just focus on just your breathing. So then, yeah, I'm getting smashed and getting beat up in jiu-jitsu, and just focusing on that breathing and realizing how much more mental clarity I have during this, stressful situation of getting choked out and getting, squished. And then so just translating that into, I mean, even just calls that you would have, potential uses of force, where you just, somebody's aggressive, they've got that, a fighting stance or whatever it is, and you're able to kind of maintain control of your breathing and sort of work through that situation without even maybe having to use force. Whereas, I've seen other guys where it's like, who maybe don't train, and as soon as somebody gets aggressive with them, okay, they're meeting that aggression immediately. Whereas it's not always necessary. And yeah, just I think just that mental clarity. I mean, there's so much to jiu-jitsu other than just like the physical violence part of it. It's just that resiliency, that fortitude to be able to kind of work through stressful situations.
Yeah. And I've heard a lot recently about jiu-jitsu and it continuing to come up because it's so much more than just this physical aspect to it. I mean, there's a lot of family dynamics. There's a lot of just, I would say, life lessons given during these, roles on the mat. And you can definitely tell I've never done it. Just hearing enough people, talk about it. But what do you think, besides the breath work, which is like phenomenal because it's something that gets so overlooked for any human, is like breathing. Like, why do I need to control my breathing? It's like, that is the one thing that you can control, right? Like, that's the one thing that can help reduce the stress on your nervous system, which is your fight or flight, that can get you into a calm state, which when you're in a calmer state, you're able to think clearer. Like, when people are like, oh, I do so much better in stress. And I'm like, you think you do, right? But like, are you actually breathing through it? Are you actually making sound decisions? Or are you just knowing that you can react really quickly to situations? So what beyond like, obviously you're getting skills, you're getting strength, you're getting the resiliency. Like, is there anything else beyond that that really jiu-jitsu like brings to you in your life?
Well, I think with the gym that I'm at now, I mean, and I would say even at my previous gym, I mean, I've only been to two gyms, but this one I've been with for just about 2 years. And I know you kind of mentioned it. It's like it's pretty much a family, an extended family, where like you have all walks of life. You have other first responders, you have other business owners, you have teachers, cops, firefighters. You have criminals and felons, and everybody kind of just comes together on the mats, and there's so much to be learned from all these different experiences and different walks of life. And the gym that I'm at now, they really foster that family environment, um, to where, I mean, I usually train in the morning. We have a 5 o'clock class, and I'm not leaving until 6:30, 7 o'clock, sometimes beyond that. Um, and it's not all rolling. A lot of it is just talking to people,
Mm-hmm.
being vulnerable with them, and learning from their experiences, going through like whatever struggles they're having. Um, Sometimes you're just an ear, a shoulder to lean on, and then other times, you're providing some, actual like tangible things to, action items.
Yeah.
Because we all have these just different experiences, and it's all related, and brought together with jujitsu.
That's super cool. That's super cool. Where are you going now? Because you've been out of being a first responder for how many years now?
I left at the very end, beginning of 22.
Okay, so
Very
a
beginning of 22.
little bit of time,
Mhm.
not a ton, but how was that transition out of being a first responder and now into really the civilian world on a day-to-day basis?
It was a struggle. When I first started, it was definitely, I had a lot of sort of mental roadblocks that I had to get over. Um, One of my biggest things was, especially as I knew when I was going to transition, I was going to leave the department. Um, I always got along really well with the older generation cops, and I'd always kind of ask them and pick their brain as like, okay, when you're not a cop anymore because you're coming up to retirement, what are you doing? Like, what is the plan beyond that? And a lot of guys just, hey, I'm just planning on retiring. Um, so I was struggling with this sort of identity once I left of, okay, I'm not a cop anymore. Like, that's who I was. That's who I always wanted to be since I was little. Um, I was, 24/7 a cop. And, coming out of that, it's like, I really struggled with that identity of, okay, that's not who I am anymore. So who am I? And I know a lot of other cops kind of have that same struggle. And I knew that there was something to, avoid to fill with that. Because one of the things I always knew about was, the statistic that cops, once they retire, is 5 years is the average lifespan. So, and now they push, the retirement, at least in California, they push the retirement to it's like 55 or 57. And so, before it was 50, like you would at least retire at 50, but then you're looking to, 5 years
Mm-hmm.
left. Um, and so I'd always was very curious about that. And I feel, especially kind of having kind of gone through a similar phase, I feel it's just not having that mission or that purpose. Because like once I left, sort of finding my identity of who I am, I ended up starting an apparel company. I'm working. That's my sort of next goal that I'm working on. Um, and it's all around just detaching from that identity, detaching from the negative, um, and really maintaining that presence, that mindfulness, and finding purpose outside of just what you think you are. Um, so that's sort of my next goal, my next chapter.
Yeah. How is it, you have this new goal, you have this new perspective. Where did you learn or where did you pick up, once you were out of it? Cuz you weren't getting really that great guidance, from the people that were retiring of like what they were going to do or what the next steps were, and you made a conscious decision of leaving the department. How, like, where did you start gathering these this information from? Like, where is my identity, right? You're making this apparel company, but like before that, like how did you start like getting all those data points of like, well, who am I? Like, who is Derek outside of the department?
I think started with listening to a lot of different podcasts, and realizing that there's, you know, doing that sort of internal work, um, really sort of diving deep into like my values, my morals, like what sort of drives me. And then it started getting into like meditation, journaling, um, like different sort of spiritual practices. That was another thing that I'd always like to have conversations with some of the certain guys at the department. Was just talking about just different religions, different spirituality, and getting just different takes. And so I started kind of getting into that, and it was kind of weird at first for me to like meditate. I think when I was a cop, I don't know that I've ever really meditated, sat and meditated. So that was one thing to try and understand it without having done it was awkward.
Yeah.
But then now I'm like learning just more all these things that like the breath work, the yoga, like I've done those things and I could see like the benefits. One of the things I started doing last year was ice baths. And so all this stuff kind of just revolve around that internal work and finding out, going inside into figuring out who you are, knowing that you're not just a label, that you're not just an officer, like a cop, like you're more than that. And you could be like, things are limitless. Like that was one of the things I'm still working on, but being really having that mindset of abundance. I mean, around everything, around money, around just life in general, love, like all these things that when you're, this big, strong cop, like you can't really talk about. But now that I'm sort of like detached from that, I'm able to realize that there's a lot of benefits from a lot of these things that I just either wasn't aware of or just really too scared to try and look into.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I was going to ask you is like, was it maybe that you hadn't been exposed to it or you were in an environment where that's not really fostered, that's not really talked about, right? Like a lot of first responders, it is this mental toughness, this physical toughness, and you're like, you do yoga? What? Right? And it's actually really cool because Boise Police Department has started to incorporate yoga. One of my other podcast guests, dispatcher does yoga, is a yoga instructor. One of my old paramedics is a breathwork and yoga instructor. And I mean, I remember doing yoga. I would I would get my partners, my EMT partners, to do it with me, and usually they were all male. And I actually have a picture of me and one of them, and his name's Derek too. And I just remember he's like, "I am not doing this," and we do it, and he's like, "Whoa, like I feel better." And I was like, "I know, like this is why you try new things. Like just have an open mindset to it." And it's fun. And how do you think like we could get these people to open up and get more of these resources in the departments, just like you said, the jiu-jitsu, just like the yoga, the breath work, like it's not really talked about in those, but yet it could benefit them so greatly.
Yeah, and that's a hard, I think, bridge to sort of connect is because I think from my perspective is like that was drilled into me to be, hey, compartmentalize everything, keep everything, you can't show your emotions. And there's a time and place for that.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, yeah, when you're on a call and something stressful or legit's going on, like, yeah, you can't sit and cry.
Right.
But being able to have, I mean, I don't know if it's just going to be like more studies that need to happen to really, because, a lot of administration, they want the numbers, they want the results, and hey, how is that tangibly worked and how is that going to work for me? So I don't know, like I said, I don't know if it's going to be more studies, or even just on like a small scale and start going, how Boise's doing this, incorporating some of these things. And I think that's kind of how it grows, is just slowly, kind of grassroots, and, sort of, I don't want to say reprogramming necessarily, but, providing that space to, for these cops to be vulnerable, for them to experience it. Like one of the biggest things that I was always worried about was like, hey, if I'm meditating, like, okay, I'm not paying attention, like what's going on. So obviously, depending on where I'm at, I'm not going to like be able to meditate truly and like work on my breath work and stuff like that. So it's I don't know. I don't have the answer of how that was going to happen. I think from a small scale, and it just would eventually, you know, pick up once they see the benefits.
Yeah. And I don't think anybody, that's the difficult part, right? Is that nobody has the exact answer to this. And it's going to take a lot of complexity to solve. I mean, it's a huge problem, which then means that it's a huge, equation to solve and to be able to get those statistics, to be able to get that information. And I think that's why you just talking today is like, oh my gosh, like this podcast really can show a lot of that information, right? These
Mm-hmm.
stories, like, yes, especially having a psychology background, like there's statistics and there's numbers, but how many of those are skewed? Like, let's start taking these, and this is like me and my brain in the present moment, right? It's like, well, let's start dissecting these interviews that I'm doing and being able to actually show them tangibly, right? Like, yes, some of them have gotten out of the career, but how do we keep them in? Like, that's our goal, right? Like, I want to keep these first responders in their careers because who knows? I could get in a car wreck and I need an ambulance. I need a police officer. I need these people, right? A house catches on fire. Like, you need these people when it's crucial, but you're not always thinking about them when you don't necessarily need them. Um, so I love, it is going to take a lot of brains, a lot of ideas, a lot of shitty ideas to get out,
Mm-hmm.
to then be able to build on and be able to, to siphon through. So let's take another break for our sponsors. I appreciate them so much being able to be with me, be able to sponsor me on this podcast, and what our mission is really being able to be servants of our hearts with kindness, compassion, and love. So I appreciate our sponsors. Mindbase is the official sponsor of Raw Thoughts podcast. Mindbase is the only mental health and wellness technology platform that goes far beyond their traditional wellness app for first responders specifically. It uses data to optimize a proactive and people-driven approach to first responders' wellness. Please reach out today to see about getting Mindbase into your agency to help our first responders. So, Derek, I really want to be able to dive into, you mentioned earlier about your apparel company, Detach. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I always knew I wanted to start something. I didn't know exactly what it was, and I wanted it to be in the realm of first responders. I mean, that's what I've done the majority of my life. Those are the people that I've connected with the majority of my life. Um, and then so sort of taking my experience of struggling as I left law enforcement, um, I had this idea to start this apparel company, a brand, and I think that the potential for at least the ideas that I have um, are limitless. Like there's so much that I want to do. Um, Obviously, I gotta start it first. Um, so the brand is called Detached Apparel Company, um, and detach is essentially detaching from that identity that I was talking about, detaching from my ego, detaching from that negativity, and living just a purposeful, like mission driven life. Um, working on mindfulness and resilience and just being able to empower other people, especially first responders, um, that even if they're, continue to be a first responder, that they're more than just
Mm-hmm.
what they identify themselves as. And so one of the first things that I'm working on doing is actually sponsoring. I'm going to start accepting donations and raising money to sponsor a first responder for a year free of jujitsu at the gym that I'm training at, which is 208 Jiu-Jitsu in Nampa. Um, so that's sort of my first goal, and then I know there's a lot of things that, like when we talked before about kind of with what you're doing, and really working on getting sponsorships for some of that, and again just the potential for that to really kind of give back to these first responders and sort of being within that community, sort of having this one foot in, one foot out, and being able to work with the first responders is something that really fuels my fire and gives me like I feel passionate about. Um, so I'm really looking forward to working on some of that.
Yeah. And I'm excited. I haven't even said this yet, but Derek is actually the one doing all the video for my sponsorship. So I'm excited to be able to help you out with, your mission, your drive, but also I just want to say thank you for also like believing in me and being like, "Hey, we're in this together, right? Like we're like-minded. We have this, very similar stories of what our past has been and where we're going in this future." And it's like we're not stopping with that. And so I just want to give a huge shout out to you for doing the video work, for doing, the incorporation and being able to bring your knowledge to this to be able to then help me on my side and really promote this podcast.
Yeah, and I still I always think it's funny that you say that. It's like I remember going back to the first time when you had your speaking event, and I got to hear you talk, and I was like, when I heard you speaking, I'm like, oh man, like I want to connect with you, and I know at some point we will, and I had to just be just a little vulnerable to send that message and to connect.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Tell our listeners about that.
yeah. So I think it was back in January, right?
Yeah.
You did a speaking event. I did the filming for it. Um, I got to just hear your story, hear, like what sort of drives you and why not? Like, why not do it?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that definitely kind of lit my fire a little bit. And I know we had a lot going on that day, and I was probably, super nervous because I was still kind of into the filming and figuring out my role. And so I was like, okay, at some point, sometime. And then it was probably a couple weeks ago. I know you started posting a little bit about the Ubuntu
Mm-hmm.
community, and then posting some other pictures with people that I sort of follow on social media and look up to. And so then I was like, oh, you know what? I have this idea for this apparel company, and I saw what you were doing, and I was like, okay, there could be some sort of collaboration here. I don't know what that looks like, but why not? I'm going to send this message. I'm going to put myself out there and see what happens. And yeah, so this is where we're at now.
Yeah. Yeah. The result of that was, really incredible because I had not only seen you be the videographer for that event, but, in the real estate world, knowing a couple of the other agents, knowing their backgrounds, what you've worked with, and just being able to see your work continuously. And then being able to get that message for me was like, oh my gosh, this is what I love people to do. I'm somebody that I love to be invited to things. So you reaching out to me and saying, hey, I have this idea. I need some collaboration. I need some, time basically. But the more important part of your vulnerability was that you told me more of your story. You told me more of your background, which I didn't know you had, first responder background. And so that to me, I was like, yes, abso-freaking-lutely, right? And it was, I'm going to say it was a long message, but when I got that, I was like, this is why I just keep doing the things. That was back in January. I got asked to be a speaker at that event, and I spoke about, why not start a podcast and where that has been and where this is going. And we even talked about right before getting recording was, to date, my views on YouTube are, 76,536 or something like that. And it was like, I'm happy for that. Like I started at zero. Like
It's amazing.
it's incredible. So like you being able to start your apparel company and coming to me and be like, hey, I need some help and also connections, right? Like you are a very introvert person. I'm a very extrovert person. But when you connect those two things, it's like, hey, like I had a list of people. I'm like, I'm gonna get you connected to this person, this person, this person, this person. And that's what I love to do. Like that's really my passion because I know their stories as well. And by knowing their stories, that's then how you can help the business. And it's also, leading with your heart and not just the money. Like you could probably message somebody else and they're like, yeah, there's no money in that. You're a startup company, right? And I'm like, no, but I know what you stand for. I know what your background is. Like I want to be able to be a part of that progress and where that's going. And then even just talking, it's like, that's been on my mind a lot recently is like, when am I going to start this apparel company? Right. Like I saw some really big name people with a t-shirt that said raw. And I was like, why do I not have? Right. And it's
Yeah,
just my own limiting beliefs. It's my own things that, well, I have enough things going on, but it's like, no, there's that passion. And so being able to hear what you've learned and then coming back and like, this is the examples of connection. Like, this is the examples, like, so wholeheartedly of like vulnerability will bring you support. And I think
absolutely.
that is the coolest thing of like you being able to send me that message and then getting to see all of these things that have fostered from just one message. And you probably felt incredibly uncomfortable sending that.
I deleted multiple times and then rewrote it and deleted it and then all right, just to send it.
Oh, that's super cool. That's super cool. Where do you see like where could you see yourself in 10 years? Like what's the lifestyle that you want to be able to bring?
I want to be able to, I don't know. I mean, there's so many different avenues that it can be. Whenever I get asked that question or talk about it, it's like I know I want to be, time with my family is like priority one. And so if I'm able to, build essentially generational wealth by that time to be able to provide for them and provide the time for them, um, that's my number one goal. And then it's to, I've always had this idea of like for my Focal Point Productions, the video production company, is to build that to allow other people who are creative, who maybe don't have like the means and don't want to work the 9 to 5, um, to be able to provide them the opportunity to go out and do what they love. So I mean, that's one of my goals there is to build that company up, um, into a legitimate production company. Um, and then I mean, I think there's so much potential with this apparel company and the different collaborations and different things that could really come from there and giving back to, I mean, not only first responders but to local communities, because like you had mentioned earlier, not really leading with money in mind. And I mean, once I made that shift of the money's going to come, the money's going to go, but if you're leading with love and leading with passion, um, I mean, where it's gotten me so far in this probably, I'd say, year that I've been actually trying to do this is, I mean, there's things I never would have done had I still been a cop.
Mm-hmm.
Like all these experiences that I've never would have had, these people I've never would have met. Um, so, I mean, to say, I mean, just looking at where I've been in this past year, 2 years, I mean, multiply that times 10, like I have big goals, big dreams, and I know now that they're possible.
Yeah. I'm super excited for you. I'm it's a privilege to be able to, be alongside and, for listeners, like that's what I absolutely love to be for people is this connector. Um and I am a very extroverted person and it's just fun to be able to, you know, think of something and be like, "Oh, wait, I have somebody and like let's tie you up," right? And and the listeners, like you can do that too. And it really does all start with that vulnerability and you've been able to show that today and I just give you huge kudos for continuing to strive to get better. You joined the Ubuntu community. Like I'm excited to see where your growth goes from there with, all of the people in that community and being able to truly foster that, leveling up in the health, wealth, and relationships. And also seeing like how much it's done for my life. And like, well, if it's done so much for my life and I, went into this very like uncomfortable kind of situation, but it expanded me, then like I want to help other people. I'm like trying to run around and save people and like in my brain I'm like you can't do that, Mackenzie. Like they have to want it.
Yeah.
I'm like I can't just like run around and like that then comes back to me, right? Like I really need to be that stability in that lighthouse and people come. So if you're listening to this and any of this really just resonates with you, if you want to be able to connect with Derek, if you want to be able to connect with me, please reach out to us. big, kudos to one of the gals. She is in the UK, emailed me. I love getting emails. All of the information is in the show notes. Derek, where can people find you?
So I'm at Focal Point Productions. It's focalpointproductionsinc.com is the website, but focal.point.inc is Instagram, and then Detach Apparel Co. On Instagram.
Yay, I'm excited. Thank you for coming on to the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Listeners, all of his information along with my information will be in the details of the show notes. Please reach out to us. We don't know what you need help with unless you are vulnerable and able to come to us, and we can help support that. So please, please, please do that. For that, we'll see you next week for another episode. Bye, guys.